On the old cobblestone street in the coastal town of Astoria, Oregon, there stood a small cafe called Rosewood Cafe. Every Monday morning, the familiar jingle of the doorbell rang out, the morning greeting of Isabelle Moore, a 28-year-old woman with neatly tied brown hair and soles worn thin after years of waiting tables. Isabelle didn't stand out. She lived quietly in a tiny rented house behind the cafe with her younger brother, who was 10 years her junior. Their mother had passed away from heart disease 3 years ago. Their father, a street blues musician, had been gone since she was in 4th grade. Since then, Isabelle had become a sister, a mother, and the one who kept the warmth in their modest home. Before we continue following Isabelle's extraordinary journey, if you also believe that a person's true worth lies not in their appearance or circumstances, but in their perseverance and relentless passion, then click like and subscribe to our channel, so we can continue spreading more inspiring stories like this to others. Now back to the story, where many more surprises still await. The morning at Rosewood passed peacefully. Regulars sat around rustic wooden tables, sipping coffee and reading paper newspapers. Old George, a retired sailor, often said, "This girl has warm hands and a voice like autumn." But few knew that before becoming a waitress, Isabelle once had a dream to become a singer. As a child, she sang in church and even won first prize in a county talent show. Her voice, while sweet, unrefined but full of emotion, once brought her mother to tears when she sang the opening lines of Amazing Grace. But when her mother fell ill, Isabelle left music school and started working full-time. Gradually, her dream of singing was folded away and tucked in a drawer, like the half-finished embroidered handkerchief her mother left behind in a memory box. One cold March afternoon, Isabelle's best friend, Rachel Mendez, an event coordinator, stopped by the cafe with sparkling eyes. "Belle, come with me to the fundraising gala tomorrow night, will you? It's at the Astoria Bay Hotel. Wear whatever you like, just be there." "A gala?" Isabelle laughed. "I don't even have the right shoes." Rachel grabbed her hand. "You don't need to be fashionable. I just need someone close by. People in this scene can be pretty cold." And so the next evening, Isabelle stood in the grand lobby, where crystal chandeliers cast warm golden light onto shimmering silk gowns. She wore a simple navy blue dress, her hair in a low bun, and a pair of borrowed shoes from Rachel. Holding a glass of water, she stayed close to the wall, trying not to get lost in a sea of business cards and refined laughter. The party went smoothly until the MC took the stage and made an unexpected announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, tonight's guest performer could not make it due to a delayed flight." A wave of murmurs filled the room. Some guests sighed. Others shook their heads, disappointed to miss the performance they had been looking forward to. "But hey," a tipsy man stood up and laughed loudly. "Why don't we let someone in the room sing instead? An impromptu show, just for fun?" A group of women nearby giggled and suddenly pointed at Isabelle. "Hey, that shy-looking waitress. Let her sing, it'll be fun." All eyes turned toward her. Rachel immediately stepped forward to intervene, but Isabelle gently placed a hand over her friend's. She smiled, not the smile of someone embarrassed, but one calm and quietly assured. "It's okay," she said. "If they want to hear, then I'll sing." And in that moment, what some thought was just a small party joke had unwittingly awakened something Isabelle herself thought she had long forgotten. Isabelle stepped onto the stage beneath hundreds of gazes, some curious, some smiling with doubt, and many laced with subtle mockery. She wore no evening gown, no sparkling jewelry, no headset mic or audio support. Just a young woman standing quietly under the stage lights, with nothing in her hands but herself. The MC looked slightly awkward, but still maintained a professional smile. "Let's give a warm round of applause for, the lady?" "Isabelle," she said softly. "Yes, a round of applause for Miss Isabelle." A smattering of polite claps followed, mostly from courteous guests. Others pulled out their phones, ready to record what they assumed would be a fun end-of-night performance. Someone whispered to the person next to them, "She looks more like a last-minute karaoke filler than a singer." Those murmurs reached Isabelle's ears like tiny thorns. But then she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began. I heard there was a secret chord. With just that first line, the entire ballroom fell silent. No background music, no premature applause. Only that voice, clear, sincere, unembellished, and rich with depth, as if each word had been drawn from her very soul. Every note seemed to carry a piece of memory, the grief of losing her mother, the night spent baking late into the evening, the sound of her younger brother coughing from a cold, the dinners of stale bread and watery soup. It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth. A man stopped mid-sip of his wine, his eyes fixed on her in thought. A middle-aged woman froze in the act of reaching for her coat. A young man stopped taking notes and simply listened in silence. The more Isabelle sang, the stronger her voice grew, not in technical precision, but in emotional clarity. Her voice wasn't performing. It was storytelling, a story no one could have read from her unassuming face. And by the time she reached the final verse, "And even though it all went wrong, I'll stand before the Lord of Song, with nothing on my tongue but hallelujah." There was no mockery left in the room. A silence stretched long and full. Then came applause, not loud or wild, but sincere, full of reverence. Then a second person stood, then a third, until the entire ballroom rose in unison, giving Isabelle a standing ovation that even seasoned professionals rarely receive. Rachel, standing off to the side of the stage, covered her mouth, eyes brimming with tears. The man who had laughed earlier now stood motionless, face flushed red, speechless. Isabelle gave a gentle bow. She said nothing. She stepped down from the stage, hands clutched tightly to the fabric of her dress, as if afraid that letting go might wake her from a dream. As soon as she entered the backstage area, a silver-haired woman with glasses and a dark velvet dress approached her. "You're Isabelle, correct?" The woman asked, her voice soft but serious. Isabelle nodded, cautious. "Yes, I just sang because no one else could." The woman extended her hand, her eyes reflecting something both warm and discerning. "I'm Margot Levinson, director. Community music programs at the Seattle Philharmonic. I was in the audience, and I believe next time, the audience should know ahead of time what they're about to witness." Isabelle stood frozen. Rachel came up and placed a hand gently on her back. "You did it, Belle," Rachel whispered, and this time the whole world heard. 3 days after the gala, Isabelle still hadn't quite recovered. She still woke up at 5 a.m., still tied on her apron, and served coffee at Rosewood Cafe like usual. The only difference was that everyone who saw her now smiled a little longer, a little more warmly. Some said, "I heard you sang at the gala, you were wonderful." An elderly woman who usually ordered chamomile tea even gave her an old silver hair clip. "It belonged to my daughter once. She dreamed of becoming a singer too. I think she'd want you to have it." But even though the people around her had changed, Isabelle still felt unchanged. That afternoon, just as she finished washing the last tray of pastries, Rachel burst into the cafe, her eyes practically glowing with excitement. "Belle, you won't believe it. They actually sent who did? Margot Levinson, Seattle Philharmonic. She wants you to join a summer training program, the Folk Voice Discovery Project. Only 6 people are selected from the entire state, and she made it clear, you don't need to audition. You're already enough." Isabelle said nothing. Not because she wasn't happy, but because, well, she couldn't believe it. "Rachel, I've never studied voice. I can't read sheet music. I don't even know whether I'm supposed to sing using my chest or my diaphragm. And that's exactly why they want you." Rachel took her hand. "They want a real voice, one that hasn't been shaped by technique or trained until it's lost its emotion." That afternoon, Isabelle walked alone along the coastal embankment, the place she used to sit with her mother as a child. The sea was the same, salty, distant, and unknowable, just like her future now. Inside her was a blend of joy and fear, because all her life Isabelle had only known how to endure. She had never allowed herself to dream big. But then she remembered her mother's eyes, the look she gave her once, and whispered, "You have a voice like the first sunshine of summer, Belle. One day the world will stop to listen." And so she said yes. 2 weeks later, Isabelle stepped into the Seattle Music Center, a sprawling, modern glass building by Lake Union, where the sunset reflected off the water like crystal. On her back was an old backpack, in her hands a paper bag with 2 egg sandwiches she had made that morning. Her heart pounded like it had at the Gala stage. "You're Isabelle Moore, right?" came a woman's voice from behind. She turned. A young blonde woman with softly curled hair, wearing a cream cashmere coat and Italian leather shoes, stood there. "I'm Natalie Rivers from Juilliard, also in this year's training group. I heard you made quite a splash at some charity." "Gala?" Isabelle gave a shy smile. "I just sang a folk song. Didn't think they picked folk singers these days." Natalie shrugged and walked briskly into the lobby. Her tone wasn't exactly unkind, but it carried weight. During the first orientation session, Isabelle sat quietly, scribbling notes into a small notebook. The others, from prestigious music conservatories, chatted about vibrato, falsetto, breath control using bel canto technique. They spoke as if using passwords to unlock doors Isabelle had never even seen. The first class was emotional, expression through sound. Margot, the silver-haired woman who had met Isabelle at the Gala, was teaching. She didn't look at Isabelle the whole session, but when it ended she walked over and quietly said, "Don't let what you haven't learned overshadow what you already have." Isabelle smiled, for the first time that day. By the 3rd day, the trainees were given an assignment: perform a song without preparation, no backing track, no support, just yourself on stage. Isabelle planned to choose a well-known tune, but when her turn came, she instinctively began singing "Wayfaring Stranger," the song her mother used to hum while walking home from late shifts. She stood there, no music, no refined technique, but each line rang out like a story from generations of the poor, the humble, the quietly enduring. When she finished, no one spoke, but this time Margot stood up. She didn't clap. She placed a hand on her chest and said one sentence. "She didn't come here to perform. She came to remind us why music ever mattered." Isabelle stepped down from the stage, her hands still trembling. But inside her, for the first time in years, and there was no self-doubt, there was a quiet belief, however fragile. Maybe I truly belong here. On Saturday night, Rainier Hall glowed under golden lights and the scent of expensive perfume. It was the closing performance of the summer training program, an event not only for the students, but also attended by music producers, record label reps, journalists, and major donors of the Seattle Philharmonic. Backstage, Isabelle stood quietly in front of the mirror, tightly clutching a folded piece of paper in her dress pocket. It held the lyrics to the song she would perform, an old folk tune called "Wild Mountain Thyme," one her mother used to sing while slicing bread in the kitchen, humming as she wiped her hands on her apron. It wasn't a song that showed off vocal range or technical brilliance, but it carried everything Isabelle had ever known about longing, tenderness, and sacrifice. Rachel sat in the second row, wearing a deep blue dress, her hair tied high as usual, eyes fixed on the stage. Without wavering, Margot stood in the very back row, holding a notebook in her hand, occasionally looking up to observe each performance intently, her expression unreadable. The act before Isabelle was a complex jazz number, filled with impressive runs and key changes. As the applause faded, the host stepped into the spotlight. "And next, please welcome someone who reminded us that music doesn't always have to be perfect. It just has to be real. Isabelle Moore, performing Wild Mountain Thyme, with no accompaniment." The lights dimmed. Isabelle stepped out. The dress she wore had been altered by a classmate from an old gown, made of rustic ivory-colored linen. Her hair wasn't professionally styled, just loosely tied with a pale blue ribbon. Around her neck was a necklace with a small floral pendant. the only gift her mother had ever bought her, for her 18th birthday, catching the lights softly on stage. Isabelle took a deep breath. She couldn't see the audience clearly, but she knew they were watching and waiting. She began to sing, "Oh, the summertime is coming and the trees are sweetly blooming." At first there were a few exchanged glances from the audience. Some weren't used to the simple melody of folk music, but as each line drifted out, slow, gentle, like wind passing through a valley, it began to seep into hearts dried out by excess. Isabelle wasn't singing to impress. She sang as if wrapping memories, fragments of old love, into her voice, and sending them floating to the rafters of the hall, where the lights twinkled like stars. "Will ye go, lassie? Go." An older woman in the third row instinctively placed her hand over her heart. An elderly man in the front leaned forward slightly, eyes closed as if remembering someone long gone. At the back of the hall, Margot nodded slowly. Rachel sat motionless, lips pressed tight, tears rolling down her cheeks without her knowing, and as Isabelle sang the final line, as softly as a farewell from a distant land, "And we'll all go together," the entire hall fell into an unforced silence. No whispering, no clicking of camera shutters, just a space filled with hearts quietly beating in unison, in the rhythm of sincerity, simplicity, and pure emotion. When she bowed her head, applause erupted. But it wasn't loud or raucous like the performances before. It was applause born from respect, from people who had lived long enough to understand that some things, though simple, are irreplaceable. Isabelle stood there, the spotlight shining, on her sweat-dappled but calm face. In that moment, she was no longer the girl mocked at the gala, no longer the shy waitress who shrank from crowds. She was Isabelle Moore, a simple woman, carrying a trove of gentle sound the world had long forgotten to listen for. As her performance ended, a tall man in a black suit stepped backstage. On his jacket, a name badge read, "Thomas Avery, Executive Producer, American Soul National Vocal Showcase." "Excuse me," he said as Isabelle sipped water. "I don't know who you are, but I know that your voice doesn't belong only to small recital halls. I want you on next season's show. And don't worry, we're not looking for polished copies. We're looking for something real." Isabelle looked at him, her heart pounding. She didn't know what lay ahead, but in this moment she knew one thing. The dream she had folded away for so many years was finally opening, page by page, as gently as the song she had just sung. One early autumn morning, with a light fog still clinging to the windows of Rosewood Cafe, Isabelle sat at her usual corner table. In front of her was a steaming cup of chamomile tea, a broken piece of biscuit, and a thick ivory-colored envelope, with the words, "American Soul, New York Studio," printed on it. Rachel sat across from her, eyes bright but calm. "Plane ticket, hotel, shooting schedule. They're taking care of everything. You just need to bring one thing." Isabelle smiled. "My voice?" Rachel shook her head. "Your heart. They've got more than enough people who can sing. But what they're missing is someone who can make a whole room fall silent." Isabelle looked out the window, where the maple leaves had just begun to turn amber. She thought of her mother, of the evenings without electricity, when the two of them would sit beside an old fireplace, share half a loaf of bread, and quietly sing ancient melodies. No stage lights, no microphone, just a voice, and a quiet, burning belief. Music is what remains when everything else is gone. 3 days later, Isabelle boarded the first flight of her life. She arrived in New York wearing a borrowed coat from a neighbor, carrying an old suitcase and a weathered notebook, the one where she had written down every song, every memory, every snippet of poem her mother had ever recited to her. At the studio, everything felt too big, too bright, too fast. People rushed by, talking into earpieces, applying makeup in the hallways, adjusting microphones inside elevators. Isabelle tried to smile, tried to breathe steadily, but inside a familiar fear was growing. I don't belong in this world. Until she stepped into the first audition room, there was no audience, just a row of cameras, 3 judges, and glaring white lights. A young man in a gray suit asked her, "What will you be singing?" Isabelle swallowed hard. She had planned to pick a powerful song like everyone had advised. But then her fingers brushed the old floral necklace, her 18th birthday gift from her mother. And almost instinctively, she answered, "You are my sunshine." The 3 judges looked at each other. It was such a simple, familiar song. But then Isabelle closed her eyes and began to sing, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." She didn't sing to win. She sang for the mothers who were never heard, for the girls who were laughed at, for the dreams that seemed to have died, but still burned quietly in someone's chest. When she sang the final line, "Please don't take my sunshine away." The cameraman quietly lowered his rig, and the oldest female judge gently wiped her glasses. No one spoke for a few seconds. Then the youngest judge said, "Isabelle, you don't need to sing another song. We've heard all we need." 2 months later, the first broadcast of American Soul aired across the United States. Isabelle Moore, no makeup, no evening gown, no flashy tricks, became a phenomenon. But the strange thing was, no one called her the new star. They called her the voice that feels like home. People wrote articles about her. Some called her the revival of America's folk soul. Others likened her to a modern-day Joan Baez, but Isabelle didn't care much about titles. After every taping, she would simply call her younger brother and tell him she had sung with all her heart. And then one day, when the show reached the finals, Isabelle asked the producers for permission to sing a song, not on the nomination list. They were surprised but agreed. That evening, on national television, before millions of viewers, Isabelle stepped on stage. She wore an old ivory linen dress, her hair tied loosely with a blue ribbon. No spotlights, no backup dancers, just a standing microphone and a long, quiet pause. Then she began to sing, "Oh, the summertime is coming." The room seemed to hold its breath. She sang the song she once sang at Rainier Hall, this time not for a scholarship, not for the cameras, just because she missed her mother. And when she reached the final line, she looked up, as if speaking to someone no longer in this world. "Will you go, lassie, go?" No one stood up first, because everyone was wiping away tears. After that performance, Isabelle stepped away from the spotlight. She declined major studio offers, refused long-term contracts. Instead, she returned to Oregon and opened a small singing class for children at the same old church where she had first found her voice. On the wooden sign hanging outside, it read, "Sometimes it's not the loudest voice that makes us listen, but the truest heart." And so the story of Isabelle Moore came to a close, from a simple woman once mocked to a voice that left the world speechless. If this journey moved you, please like and subscribe to our channel. It gives us the motivation to keep sharing heartfelt, emotional, and inspiring stories like this one. See you again on the next journey.